Imagine for a moment that the universe has its own language, one not spoken with words, but with events, a language of impossible chances, of fated encounters, of answers that arrive even before the question is formed in your mind. Carl Jung, the architect of the soul, not only imagined this language, he deciphered it. He called it synchronicity, the principle that explains how your inner world, your thoughts, fears, and most secret desires weaves the very reality you experience on the outside. He discovered that coincidences are, in fact, cracks in the fabric of the real, moments when the matrix reveals itself, showing that your mind and the cosmos are not separate. And what if there were a key, an ancient tool, capable not of predicting the future, but of doing something infinitely more powerful, translating what your unconscious is trying to tell you right now? Jung found this key in the I Ching, the Chinese oracle. He did not use it for divination, but as a mirror of the soul, a method for photographing the exact state of your psyche, revealing hidden patterns and truths your ego refuses to see. The most shocking truth he discovered is that the random result of the oracle is, in fact, a direct and precise echo of your inner state. The universe is not just watching, it is responding in real time. What we are about to unveil here is not a theory. It is a map to the hidden dimension of your existence. If you have ever felt that there is an order behind the chaos, that your life is more than a sequence of accidents, then you are in the right place. But be warned, after you cross this door, you will never see reality the same way again. If your soul recognizes the truth in these words, if a part of you has always known there was something more, then make a pact with yourself now. This is not just another video. It is the beginning of a journey inward. Subscribe to the channel, because this is our training ground for explorers of the psyche. Turn on notifications, as each video is a piece of the puzzle. Like this video to signal to the universe and the algorithm that this search for meaning is vital. And most importantly, comment below with the strangest and most significant coincidence that has ever happened to you. Your story is living proof that synchronicity is real. Let's create an archive of moments when the matrix revealed itself. Now, prepare yourself. The journey begins. To understand Carl Jung's obsession with synchronicity, we must first delve into the wound of the modern man, a wound that Jung himself felt bleeding in his own soul. Born at the end of the 19th century, he was a product of the Age of Reason, a time when science promised to dissect the universe and strip away all its secrets, leaving behind a cold, mechanical, and soulless cosmos. Medicine and psychiatry in its infancy saw the human being as a complex biological machine, whose flaws, neuroses, psychosis, anxieties could be adjusted like the gears of a clock. Jung was trained in this tradition. He was a scientist, an empiricist, a doctor dedicated to observing facts and formulating diagnoses based on causal logic, A causes B, which in turn causes C. However, the deeper he delved into the psyche of his patients at the Berghusley Hospital, and the more honestly he looked into the abysses of his own mind, the more this worldview proved to be terribly inadequate. He saw dreams that seemed to predict the future, visions shared by people who had never met, and, above all, he witnessed the healing power of experiences that defied any rational explanation. Reason, he realized, had built an enlightened and orderly world, but at the cost of exiling mystery, the numinous, the sacred. Modern man had conquered the outer world, but had lost his soul, becoming a stranger in his own inner universe. This realization was the genesis of his journey. Jung did not seek the occult out of an esoteric whim. He sought it as a doctor searching for a cure for the deepest illness of his time, the loss of meaning. He saw his patients suffering not only from personal traumas, but from a collective hunger for connection to something greater than the ego. They were thirsty souls in a desert of materialism. His investigation into alchemy, Gnosticism, mythologies, and finally, synchronicity, was not an escape from science, but a heroic attempt to expand it. He dared to ask, what if causality is only one of the principles that govern the universe? And what if there exists another, a principle of connection through meaning, that operates alongside the laws of physics? This question was heresy in his time, but for Jung, it was the only one that mattered. It was the search for a bridge that could reconnect the human mind to the pulsating heart of the cosmos, a bridge to heal the split between fact and meaning, between the world we can measure and the world we can feel. Synchronicity was not a discovery. It was a rediscovery of a truth that ancient cultures had always known, that the psyche is not isolated within the skull, but is an active participant in the great tapestry of existence. The key that would open the door to the acausal dimension was not forged in the laboratories of Zurich, but came to Jung as a gift, an echo of ancient wisdom from the other side of the world. The central figure in this transmission was Richard Wilhelm, a German theologian and missionary who had spent decades in China. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Wilhelm did not view Chinese culture with the arrogance of a colonizer, but with the humility of a disciple. He delved deeply into the classic texts, especially the I Ching, the Book of Changes, not as a curious artifact, but as a philosophical and psychological system of immense depth. When Wilhelm and Jung met in the 1920s, the connection was instantaneous and profound. Jung found in Wilhelm not just a scholar, but a soul who had experienced the Eastern mentality, a mindset not based on linear causality, but on a perception of the totality of the moment. Wilhelm presented Jung with his translation of the I Ching, a life's work. For Jung, receiving that text was one of the most important moments of his life. He described the event as a ray of light, the missing piece of his puzzle. Until then, his ideas about meaningful coincidences were fragmented, intuitive, and difficult to articulate. The I Ching offered him a complete system, a functional model of a universe that operated on the principle he was struggling to define. The Chinese oracle was not about predicting the future. It was about diagnosing the present in its totality. Its premise was that everything that happens at a given moment in time carries the unique quality of that moment. Thus, the random toss of coins or yarrow stalks to form a hexagram was not an isolated event, but an integral part of the total situation, including the psychological state of the person asking the question. It was a radical idea that challenged the Western notion of randomness as a lack of order. To the Chinese mind, and now to Jung, randomness was simply another form of order, an order woven by meaning. Wilhelm was not just a translator, he was a transmitter of a worldview. He explained to Jung that, for the Chinese sage, the mind and the world are not separate domains. The I Ching worked because the microcosm of the individual's psyche and the microcosm of the universe were in constant resonance. This encounter with Wilhelm and the I Ching was the catalyst that allowed Jung to solidify his theory. It gave him the structure and the authority of a millennial tradition to support what his own clinical and personal experience was already showing him. It was the external confirmation he needed to dare present to the skeptical Western world. Such a revolutionary concept that our reality is shaped not only by chains of cause and effect, but by fields of meaning that connect the inner and the outer in a mysterious and intelligent, dense. What exactly is synchronicity? Jung defined it as an acausal connecting principle. To unpack this dense phrase, we first need to understand what it is not. Synchronicity is not the same as synchronism, which simply means things happening at the same time. It is not luck, it is not blind fate, and it is definitely not just a matter of statistical probability. The attempt to explain a meaningful coincidence through mathematics is, in the Jungian view, like trying to explain the impact of a symphony by analyzing the frequency of sound waves. The analysis completely misses the essential point, the meaning. Synchronicity operates on two fundamental pillars. The first is the occurrence of two or more events that have no detectable causal relationship. For example, you dream of a golden scarab beetle, and the next day, while telling the dream to your therapist, a nearly identical beetle taps on the office window. There is no way the dream could have caused the beetle's appearance, nor could the beetle have caused the dream the night before. The causal connection is absent. The second pillar, and the most crucial, is that the juxtaposition of these acausal events is profoundly meaningful to the person experiencing them. The scarab was not just any insect. In the context of Jung's patient's analysis, she was trapped in excessive rationalism. The beetle, a classic Egyptian symbol of rebirth and renewal, was the exact symbolic answer she needed to break through her intellectual defenses. The coincidence was a message, a living symbol bursting into reality. Jung posited that these events happen when an archetype from the collective unconscious is constellated, that is, activated in an individual's psyche. An archetype is a universal pattern of psychic energy like that of the mother, the hero, the sage, or, in this case, transformation. When one of these patterns is activated by a life situation, a crisis, a major question, an impasse, the psychic energy does not remain contained within the person. It seems to leak into the outer world, organizing random events in a way that mirrors the inner archetypal theme. It is as if the archetype creates a force field of meaning, and external events simply align with this field. Therefore, synchronicity is the visible manifestation of the underlying unity between psyche and matter, or what Jung, along with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, called the unused mundus, the one world. It is a glimpse into a deeper reality where the separation between observer and observed, between mind and world, dissolves. It is not that the mind magically causes events, but that mind and matter are two different aspects of the same unified reality. And in moments of synchronicity, this fundamental unity reveals itself. Jung's genius in approaching the I Ching was to completely discard the question that obsesses the Western mind: does this work to predict the future? He replaced it with a much more profound question: what does this oracle reveal about the present moment? For him, the I Ching was not a window into tomorrow, but a high-definition mirror of the now, reflecting not the surface of events, but the hidden topography of the psyche. He understood it as a tool for psychological diagnosis, perhaps the most sophisticated ever created. The consultation process, in Jung's view, is an act of constellating psychic energy. The question the querent asks is not a mere intellectual curiosity. It must be charged with a genuine emotional need. With psychic tension, it is this tension that prepares the field for a synchronous event. The act of tossing the coins or manipulating the stalks is seen as the moment when the apparent chaos of the physical world is organized by this inner tension. The randomness of the method is, paradoxically, what guarantees its precision. If the querent could consciously choose the hexagram, they would only project the desires and defenses of their ego. Randomness, however, bypasses the ego. It allows an answer to emerge from a deeper place, the self, the totality of the psyche that encompasses both the conscious and the unconscious. The resulting hexagram, with its changing lines and symbolic text, is therefore a photograph of the archetypal quality of that specific moment. It does not say do this or that will happen. Instead, it says the situation, seen from the perspective of the whole, has this quality, this dynamic. For example, a hexagram might suggest a time of retreat and introspection, not as a command, but as a reflection that the individual's unconscious energies are already moving in that direction. Even if their conscious ego is struggling to push forward and act, the I Ching, then, functions as a wise and impartial therapist. It offers an objective, archetypal perspective that helps the ego reposition itself in relation to the greater forces at play in the unconscious. The language of the I Ching is the language of symbols, the native tongue of the unconscious. The images of mountains, water, thunder, heaven, and earth are not literal, but represent complexes of psychological energy. To learn to interpret the oracle is to learn to dialogue with your own center, with the wisdom that already resides within you, but is often muffled by the noise of rational thought and the fears of the ego. For Jung, the supreme value of the I Ching was not in its ability to give answers, but in its ability to provoke the right questions and to force the individual into deep self-reflection. It was a path to self-knowledge, a mirror that showed not just the face, but revealed the soul. The introduction of the concept of synchronicity and the use of the I Ching as a psychological tool represented Jung's most radical break with dominant Western thought. Since ancient Greece with Aristotle, through the Enlightenment with Newton, the Western worldview has been built on the iron pillar of causality. Everything must have a cause, and that cause must precede the effect in a linear, uninterrupted chain. This principle is the foundation of our science, our technology, and our way of thinking about reality. It is a powerful tool for manipulating the material world, but as Jung realized, it is completely blind to other forms of order. The philosophy behind the I Ching, and by extension synchronicity, is not based on causality, but on a logic of correspondence, of resonance, of meaning. The fundamental question is not what caused this, But what likes to happen together with what? It is a worldview that perceives the universe not as a machine, but as an organism, where all parts are interconnected not by mechanical wires, but by a web of meaning. To the Western mind, this sounds like primitive mysticism. Jung, however, saw it as an equally valid form of science, just based on a different principle. He argued that the West had specialized in understanding the how of things, while the East had delved into the what of the totality of the moment. Causality explains the connection between successive events in time, while synchronicity explains the connection between simultaneous events, united not by time, but by meaning. This philosophical break was a source of immense isolation for Jung. Many of his colleagues, including Freud, saw his interest in these topics as a dangerous relapse into the dark swamp of occultism. They accused him of abandoning scientific rigor, but Jung was convinced that science needed to evolve beyond its own self-imposed limits. He believed that if psychology was to be truly a science of the soul psyche, it could not ignore the deepest and most meaningful experiences of human life, even if they did not fit existing paradigms. He was not proposing the replacement of causality with synchronicity. He saw the two principles as complementary, as two different lenses through which one can observe reality. Causality helps us understand the physical world, build bridges, and cure diseases. Synchronicity helps us understand our place in the cosmos, find meaning in our lives, and navigate the journey of individuation. By defending synchronicity, Jung was trying to return to the West a dimension it had lost, the dimension of the soul. He was saying that reality is much richer, stranger, and more intelligent than our causal logic allows us to see. He invited us to dare to look at the cracks in our orderly worldview, for it is in these cracks that the light of meaning can enter. For the I Ching to function as a mirror of the psyche, its language had to be the same language spoken by the unconscious, and the native tongue of the unconscious, as Jung demonstrated, is not logic, but the symbol, the image, the archetype. Jung saw in the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching not just a set of advice or situations, but a complete system of archetypes, a symbolic representation of all the fundamental phases and dynamics of life. An archetype is an innate psychic structure, a universal pattern of experience and behavior inherited from our ancestors and shared by all of humanity. They are like dry riverbeds in the psyche, which personal experience fills with the water of life. The archetype of the great mother, the wise old man, the shadow, the hero, all exist as potentialities in each of us. Jung realized that each hexagram of the I Ching was the personification of one of these archetypal patterns. For example, hexagram 1, Chai Yen the creative, composed of 6 yang lines, is the purest expression of the Sky Father archetype, the masculine, active, spiritual, and creative principle. In contrast, hexagram 2, Kun the receptive, with its 6 yin lines, embodies the Earth Mother archetype, the feminine, passive, material, and nurturing principle. All the other 62 hexagrams are dynamic combinations and interactions between these two primordial forces and other archetypes. Hexagram 29, Ken the abysmal, with its doubled water trigram, represents the archetype of the abyss, of danger, of the deep unconscious, but also of the courage that comes from facing danger with a sincere heart. Hexagram 52, Kan the mountain, represents the archetype of stillness, of meditation, of the end of one cycle and the beginning of another in a state of introspection. When a person consults the oracle, the hexagram that emerges indicates which archetype has been constellated or activated in their life at that moment. If a person is in an identity crisis, struggling to find their way, and receives hexagram 4, Mang youthful folly, the oracle is reflecting the activation of the ignorant disciple archetype who needs to seek a master. The answer is not a ready-made solution, but a symbolic diagnosis. You are living this archetypal dynamic now. Recognize it. This approach transforms the I Ching from a fortune-telling book into a map of the soul's journey. Reading a hexagram becomes an act of symbolic amplification. Very similar to working with dreams in Jungian therapy, the reader needs to meditate on the images, connect the symbols with their personal situation, and feel which aspect of that archetypal pattern is alive within them. This is why the I Ching's answer often seems obscure and poetic. It speaks directly to the non-rational part of the psyche, inviting reflection rather than giving orders. It is a language that teaches us to experience life as a great mythical drama, where we are the protagonists living out eternal stories. One of the most difficult concepts for the Western mind to grasp, yet central to synchronicity and the I Ching, is the nature of time. We in the West inherited from the Greeks a conception of time as chronos, linear, quantitative, uniform. It is the time of the clock, a succession of identical moments that can be measured and divided. It is time that passes. Ancient Chinese wisdom, as well as another lesser-known Greek concept, saw time primarily as kairos, qualitative, unique, meaningful. Kairos is the right moment, the opportunity, the unique and unrepeatable quality of an instant. It is not about what time is it, but rather what kind of time is this. For the I Ching, each moment has a seed, a particular quality that contains within it the potential of everything that can flourish from it. The oracle works because it is assumed that the pattern formed by the coins or stalks participates in and expresses the unique quality of that specific moment when the consultation is made. It is not the future that is being read, but the inherent quality of the present. Jung embraced this idea radically. He argued that the psychic state of the querent is not separate from time, but is the inner manifestation of the quality of that kairos. Their anxiety, their doubt, or their hope is the human face of that moment. Therefore, when they cast the coins, the result must, by necessity, mirror the same quality. It is a consequence of the unity of being. It is like dipping a cup into a river. The water inside the cup will have the same composition as the water flowing in the river at that point and at that instant. The question and the psychic state of the querent are the cup, and the resulting hexagram is the sample of the quality of the river of time at that moment. This perspective changes everything. Consulting the oracle ceases to be an attempt to gain an advantage over the future and becomes an act of profound mindfulness of the present. It is an exercise in attuning oneself to the music of the now. If the oracle indicates a time of patient waiting, hexagram 5, Shu, it is not a prediction that you will have to wait, but a diagnosis that the quality of the present moment is one of waiting. To act impulsively at such a moment would be like trying to plant seeds in the middle of winter. It would be going against the nature of time. Acting in harmony with the quality of the moment, on the other hand, is what the Taoists call wu wei, effortless action, which flows with the Tao. Synchronicity, then, occurs more easily when we are in tune with kairos. When we are fully present and open to the quality of the moment, we are more able to perceive the meaningful correspondences between our inner world and outer events. The anxious mind, always stuck in the past chronos that has passed or the future chronos that has not yet arrived, is blind to the miracles of the now. The I Ching, for Jung, was a training for this perception, a method for learning to feel the quality of time instead of just measuring it. Jung was not an armchair theorist. For him, an idea only had value if it could be tested in the furnace of lived experience. He did not just study the I Ching, he used it extensively. For decades, the book was a constant companion on his desk, a tool he applied both to his own life and, with caution, to the therapeutic process of his patients. His personal use was a form of continuous dialogue with his unconscious. In moments of doubt, creative block, or important decisions, he would consult the oracle. He did not seek a definitive answer or an order to be followed blindly. On the contrary, he used the hexagram's response as a starting point for reflection, a new perspective that forced him to confront aspects of the situation his ego might be ignoring. He describes in his memoirs how, at times, the oracle's answer would deeply irritate him, as it seemed to contradict his conscious desires. And it was precisely these moments that he considered the most valuable. The irritation was a sign that the oracle had touched upon a complex, a blind spot in his personality. He would then use this friction to deepen his self-analysis. It was like having an internal supervisor, impartial and brutally honest. In his clinical practice, Jung was much more selective. He did not introduce the I Ching to every patient. He used it primarily in situations of therapeutic impasse, when a patient was stuck in a rigid intellectualism, unable to access their own symbolic and emotional material. In one famous case, He was dealing with a patient whose Cartesian logic was so impenetrable that no progress was being made. In a moment of intuition, Jung suggested a consultation with the I Ching. The patient, skeptical, agreed. The resulting hexagram and its texts described the patient's psychological situation with such shocking and poetic accuracy that his rational defenses simply crumbled. It was the synchronous event that broke the deadlock and opened a path for the unconscious material to emerge. The oracle worked not as magic, but as a symbolic shock that destabilized a one-sided conscious attitude. Jung emphasized that the goal was never to transfer responsibility for the decision to the oracle. The final decision always rested with the individual. The role of the I Ching was to enrich the decision-making process by bringing the perspective of the unconscious to light. It was a way to ensure that the decision was made not just by the ego, but in dialogue with the totality of the self. This practical approach transformed the I Ching from an esoteric text into a dynamic psychological instrument. Jung demonstrated that ancient wisdom could be a powerful ally in the modern journey of self-knowledge, a laboratory for the soul where hypotheses about oneself could be tested against the impartial wisdom of the archetypes. Jung's journey to integrate synchronicity and the I Ching into Western thought was not a triumphant path. It was a battle fought on multiple fronts, against fierce criticism from the outside and against the dangers of misinterpretation from within. The first and most obvious line of attack came from the scientific and psychoanalytic community. To most of his contemporaries, the theory of synchronicity was, at best, a philosophical speculation, without proof, and at worst, a shameful dive into mysticism and superstition. The accusation was that Jung had abandoned the scientific method, trading rigorous observation for anecdotes and coincidences. Skeptics argued, and still argue, that synchronous events can be explained by laws of probability. The law of large numbers states that unlikely events happen all the time. Confirmation bias. We notice and remember coincidences that fit our beliefs and forget those that don't. And apophenia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data. For them, the meaning is not in the event itself, but is projected by the human mind. Jung never completely denied these factors. He recognized the importance of critical thinking, but argued that a purely statistical explanation failed to address the most important aspect, the transformative and numinous power of the experience for the individual. Science could explain the probability of a beetle hitting a window, but it could not explain the existential impact of that beetle for that patient at that exact moment. The second battlefront, perhaps even more worrying for Jung, was the danger of the trivialization and misuse of his ideas. He knew that, in the wrong hands, the I Ching could easily regress to the level of a superficial fortune-telling tool, used for trivial questions or to evade personal responsibility. He watched with horror the growing market of pop occultism, where sacred symbols and tools of introspection were turned into consumer products to satisfy the ego's curiosity. This is the shadow of the oracle, the temptation to use it to predict the stock market, to ask if someone likes us, or to get an easy answer that spares us the painful work of self-reflection. Jung insisted that the I Ching only works psychologically when the question is serious, and when the querent is willing to meditate deeply on the answer, however uncomfortable it may be. Using it lightly not only produces meaningless results, but also desecrates a sacred tool. This tension between serious use and trivialization continues to this day. In a world of tarot apps and internet horoscopes, the challenge of approaching the I Ching with the reverence and depth that Jung proposed is greater than ever. To defend Jung's vision today means rescuing synchronicity from the swamp of magical thinking and representing it as a serious psychological concept, while at the same time protecting the sanctity of the I Ching from the profanation of quick and superficial consumption. What, then, is the lasting legacy of the connection Jung established between synchronicity and the I Ching? Its true value lies not in proving that magic exists, but in providing a practical compass for the most important journey of human life, the process of individuation. Individuation, in the Jungian vocabulary, is the lifelong process of becoming your most complete and authentic self. It is the journey to integrate the conscious and unconscious aspects of the personality, to heal the inner divisions, and to realize the unique potential of the self. It is a path that requires courage, honesty, and, above all, an ability to listen to the guidance that comes from within. This is where synchronicity and the I Ching become invaluable tools. They function as the compass on this journey. In a noisy world, filled with external voices telling us who we should be, what we should want, and how we should live, synchronicity acts as a whisper from the self, a sign that we are on the right path or a warning that we have strayed. A synchronous event is a moment of alignment, when our personal path intersects with the greater pattern of the cosmos. Paying attention to these moments is learning to navigate life, not just with the map of the ego's logic, but with the intuition that senses the field of meaning around us. The I Ching, in this context, is a method for intentionally calibrating this compass. When we feel lost, confused, or at a crossroads, consulting the oracle is a way of stopping and asking our deepest center, where am I? What is the nature of this terrain I am treading? The hexagram's answer helps us to orient ourselves on the archetypal map of the human journey, to understand the phase we are in, be it growth, crisis, harvest, or retreat, and to act in harmony with it. In modern life, we are constantly pushed toward action, productivity, and exteriority. Jung's legacy invites us to balance this tendency with the practice of withdrawal, reflection, and inner listening. To integrate synchronicity into our lives means cultivating a state of open awareness, observing the rhymes and resonances between our thoughts and the world. It means keeping a journal of dreams and coincidences, not as a superstitious exercise, but as a way of collecting data on the movements of our unconscious. To use the I Ching in a Jungian way is to engage in a continuous dialogue with our totality, transforming life's crises into opportunities for growth, and difficult decisions into rituals of self-knowledge. Ultimately, Jung's work with these concepts does not offer us a belief system, but a set of practices. It is an invitation to live more symbolically, more deeply, and more connectedly, to recognize that we are not isolated gears in a dead machine, but conscious participants in a living, intelligent, and profoundly meaningful universe.